Okay, so let me ask you, how old is the Earth?
Okay, so let's apply that principle. The historical record actually tells us.
Yep.
Tells us that God created everything in 6 days. Adam was created on the sixth day of creation.
Mm.
It tells us that Adam was 130 years old when his son Seth was born, and Seth was 105 when his son Enos was born, and then all the way down to Noah. And it says in the 600th year of Noah's life, the flood took place. You can just add those numbers up. They're all there in Genesis chapter 5.
Yep.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to do it. It's straightforward. In fact, I get my grandchildren to do it as an exercise when they get to their 10th birthday. I'll sit down and we build a timeline of Bible history.
Wow.
And you'll discover that the flood occurred 1,656 years after the creation. And then you can follow on and discover that Abraham was born about 2,000 years after the creation. From Abraham to Jesus is about 2,000 years. We know that scripturally and also from history. And from the time of Jesus to the present day is about 2,000 years.
Mm.
So if you add those up, according to the Bible, and this is not my idea, here we are about 6,000 years after the creation. Now that's a bombshell. I mean, 6,000 years? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, most people would say that.
Yes. And look, I've got to be honest, when I realised that, it really did take my breath away. And I had to say, wow, Lord, there's got to be some evidence of that. But you know there is.
Yes.
There's enormous amounts of evidence for a recent creation.
Yes.
It's just that people don't know about it. But that's the sort of thing which is on our website.
It feels like a big claim, and it feels like, well, a big claim, it needs some big support.
Absolutely.
So could you give us some of those? I mean, obviously people can go to the website and they can find out those.
Sure.
Creation.com/age, was it? Or 101?
Yeah. Creation.com/age.
Age, and you can go and see a whole list there.
101 evidences.
We've spent a bit of time talking about radiometric dating, which I think is really important. And actually, there's probably a lot more reading that people can do on that. And again, we'd refer them to the website, creation.com. So let's go back to the evidences. What
Sure.
are the other evidences? So we've talked about actually radiometric dating. You can find rocks of a known age, and the radiometric dating gets it wrong.
Yeah.
But what about other evidences for a young age?
Look, there's a lot of these. Let me just give you a few. And these are the sorts of things that people never hear about, right?
Yep.
The river systems around the world today dump about 20 billion tonnes of mud and sediment onto the ocean floor every year. Now, we can take an average depth of mud and sediment. We can calculate approximately how much is there. We know the rate at which it's being added to, so we can place an upper limit on the age of the ocean floor.
Okay.
And it turns out all of that sediment at the current rates, right? We're just taking a process, which we observed today.
Yep.
We're winding it backwards.
Yeah.
And all of that would have got there in less than 12 million years.
Interesting.
Now, that's a disaster for the evolutionary story because the oceans are supposed to be at least 3,000 million years old, not just 12. But then people might say, yes, but it's too long for the biblical account of only thousands of years. So you've got to go back to the historical record. So is there some event in the historical record in Genesis that might have dumped billions of tons of mud and sediment on the ocean floor? And you guessed it, the flood. Right? So when you have the true historical record of the history of the Earth, we have the basis on which we can interpret the evidence we see. There are stacks of those. The rate at which the continents are being eroded would mean that the current continents would erode down to sea level in just 25 million years. How come they're still here? You know, the Earth is supposed to be 4.5 billion years old, we're told. It's not consistent with the evolutionary story. Outside of the Earth, looking into our solar system, people think that astronomy is, just a lay down misere of proof of evolutionary processes and vast age. The moons of Jupiter, absolutely fascinating. There's lots of those. Back in 2018, they discovered another 12. They were interesting because they were what are called retrograde moons. They orbit Jupiter in the reverse direction from all the others,
Wow.
which rotate around Jupiter in the same direction which Jupiter itself is spinning on its axis.
Yeah.
So that's a bit interesting. That's another story. But in this group of 12 going backwards, there's one going forwards. And so, in the article in the journals, the scientists said, this is an unstable situation. Head-on collisions would quickly occur and grind the objects down to dust. but they're not dust. They're still there.
Mm.
So just how long can you fly upstream in amongst all these other moons with an orbit that crosses their paths and not collide? So what it says is those moons orbiting Jupiter have not been there for 4.5 billion years, lucky to have been there for 1 million years.
Mm.
So it's a pointer to a recent creation.
Mm.
Now, the evolutionists can always make up a story, and they'll make up a story that says, well, maybe there was a collision nearby and the debris got captured in Jupiter's orbit and ended up in this nice circular group going the wrong way, except for one which is going the right way. But anyway, let's move on.
Number of specific collisions I think are needed. Yeah,
it's a long bow to draw.
Yeah, got you.
And I don't think it's really a plausible explanation at all. Far more likely that the creator made it that way so that there's an indelible stamp of his creative genius on the moons of Jupiter, showing us that they were recently created. Saturn's rings are decaying away at an alarming rate. The Cassini space probe passed through the rings multiple times towards the end of its life. And the results are that scientists believe, secular scientists, that the rings cannot be more than 400 million years old. So there's no really plausible model for how they formed. Here they are, and they're decaying rapidly. So there are some things that are very discordant with the evolutionary story. But things which perhaps are more directly related to the biblical age, look at the population of the world today. It's about 8 billion people, as recently estimated. Do you know, when I was born, the Earth's population was 2.5 billion.
Wow.
And when I was doing my postgrad work, it was about 4 billion. And now it's 8 billion. So how long can we keep on projecting this? And you go backwards. Now, here's the problem, you see. If you look at the number of people that survived the flood, and there were 6 people who then populated the world, Shem, Ham and Japheth, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, and let that population grow at the rate of about 0.5% for 4,500 years, you end up with 8 billion.
Just 0.5%, is that reasonable?
That's a very conservative growth rate. The growth rate today is more like 1% or even more.
Wow.
So more than sufficient to allow for things like wars, famines and diseases. But if mankind had been on the planet for 100,000 years or more, where are all the people? We should be shoulder to shoulder on every square metre of the Earth's surface, including the ocean basins, and that wouldn't be enough.
Wow.
So it's not consistent with the idea that we've been on this planet for 100,000 years or perhaps even longer.
Sounds like you can't even go back 10 or 20,000 years. Just with I've not looked into the numbers, but just from what you're saying there.
Well, that's right. But it's quite consistent with the biblical timelines.
Yeah.
Another one which is very interesting, the discovery of carbon-14 in dinosaur bones and in fossils everywhere. The remains of living things consistently show the presence of carbon-14. Carbon-14 has a relatively short half-life, about 5,700 years. So quick that you really would not expect to find or be able to detect carbon-14 for more than about maybe 60 to 80,000 years.
That's its maximum life or maximum time you can.
Yeah, but to be able to, be down to maybe a molecule and then that's going to ultimately decay away as well.
That'd be the daughter element. It would be so small you can't detect it.
It can't detect it. So the fact that carbon-14 is consistently found in organic material, fossils, says that they haven't been around for millions of years. Could only be a matter of thousands, but thousands is consistent with the Bible's record of history. And when you correct for things like the effect of the flood, the dates one gets from carbon-14 dating actually contract, but that's another story we could go into. So there's a lot of these things which show that the evolutionary story really struggles to explain processes that we can observe today. And there are some of those which point very strongly to just thousands of years.